was 2016, 2017. I was going to my local community college at the time, Vaynerchuk Community College, and I had a friend, Stephen Lippold, who introduced me to this series on YouTube called Daily V's. I never heard of them, and I had never heard of the person that those Daily V's was starring, which was Gary Vaynerchuk, or as I'll call him throughout the rest of this episode, Gary Vee. From that point that my friend Stephen showed me that, I couldn't stop consuming his content for probably 3-4 years after. I just consumed him daily, whether it was the Daily V's, his books, his presentations and keynotes, which he shared through the Daily Vee, but even just in other places, just could not consume him enough, and heavily influenced how I think about marketing. But the key here is that I had to slowly move, I wouldn't say past him, but just beyond him. While I still consume some of his stuff, I find a lot of it isn't super practical and isn't super useful today. But the book that we're going to review today, which is Day Trading Attention, which is his most recent book, this book was something, after reading it, it really brought me back into his orbit of, damn, Gary Vee knows what he's talking about when it comes to marketing, but it's specifically social media marketing, how to do that well. But before we get into the book and all the insights that I want to share with you today, let's run the intro. Welcome to episode 2 of the book review, a special series of On Marketing where I share books, insights from books, and questions that then you can apply to your own marketing with the overall goal of uncovering what marketing truly is and how to do it in 2025 and beyond. I won't tell you what to think in this episode. I'll help you improve how you think about marketing and life. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist by day and a podcast host by night. This was recorded on April 13th, 2025. And as a reminder, all opinions shared in this podcast are the individual views of the host and guests, not those of their employees or associate organizations. This content is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered professional, marketing, or life guidance. Listeners act on the information provided at their own risk. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned in the opening, the book that we'll be reviewing today is Day Trading Attention, How to Actually Build Brand and Sales in the New Social Media World by Gary Vaynerchuk, or Gary Vee. This book focuses on Gary's updated playbook for building brand and driving sales through social media, which was the byline. He argues that attention today, which is why it's called Day Trading Attention, is the most important and valuable currency for marketers, and that we need to move faster, listen harder, and create smarter to stay relevant and capture and gain and get that attention wherever it's at. In this episode, as I did in the last one, I'll share a few caveats. The last one was an older book, so a lot of the caveats were around that. Little different this time. Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary Vee is a unique person, so I'll definitely touch on some of that. And then I'll share 5 insights from the book that you can use to sharpen your marketing, and then 3 questions that you can use to apply these insights, lessons into your actual marketing. So let's jump into the caveats. First caveat is Gary mainly advises and works with Fortune 500, 100 brands. So while a lot of his guidance and videos are around mom and pop shops, the actual reality of his business and what he does day to day is mostly around large businesses. If you watch any of his marketing workshops or marketing webinars, you will see he'll bring in some of the biggest CMOs on there, which is just very helpful to realize is that some of his advice isn't going to be applicable to smaller brands. I'll use this probably in some of my other caveats, but he talks about, or has at least at one point talked about, creating 100 plus pieces of content. That is not practical for a mom and pop shop, but it is practical for Pepsi. It is practical for whatever the large brand he works with. So just keep that in the back of your mind, is that his day-to-day is working with these brands. So even though this book is probably positioned for the mom and pop shops, that's impossible to pull out of it, is just the fact of that his expertise is with large brands, and not that his expertise isn't with smaller brands, but definitely he's getting paid to work with big brands. So just remember that, and maybe we'll push some of his insights aside just because of that caveat. Caveat number 2 is that, like the 100 pieces of content, a lot of his advice borders on extreme. So rarely will Gary give you an incremental tactic. Now, some of his stuff will be incrementally based, but a lot of his stuff will require significant investment and kind of a mental shift to be like, okay, I'm going to post frequently on social. So while I think some of his advice is extreme, I think there's a nuance and there's a secret within it, is that most of the biggest shifts, the biggest improvements we'll have don't come from small tweaks. They come from significant changes. It requires you to go all in versus just kind of tiptoeing into it. And I think that's something that you need to take away from Gary, is that a lot of his advice is going to be going all in, but that's how he creates huge impact. Grant Cardone, 10x impact. But that's how he does it, is not by just doing these small tweaks, changing the creative just slightly. He's on these huge changes, which for most people come in social is actually great because their thinking is so far behind. So if you're someone who has advanced thoughts around social and you're looking for those incremental improvements, this book will give you some of that, but it won't give you any of these incremental small tweaks because most of his whole brand is these huge changes, totally rethinking how you approach social, paid, all of that. So while I found a lot of his going all in points to be useful and valuable, and I'll include those in the insights, just beware that a lot of his advice is extreme. And if you're just looking for some small tweaks, you're going to have to weave through some of those extreme takes that he has. And then finally, this caveat is less about Gary and more on just how frequently platforms change. Platform social media is inherently volatile, making most of the advice specific to platforms not evergreen and will probably within a year become not useful. So just beware, there's some chapters in this book if you actually go and buy it, and if my review isn't enough for you to get it, but you enjoy the review and you go and buy it, just beware that there's one chapter for sure, maybe two on platforms. A lot of that information won't be useful, as in his previous books he's done some of that. I think it's cool to do that because you want those incremental or those kind of current changes or current tips, but it just within a year or 6 months will become not useful because the platforms change so quick. So that's a final caveat, is that platforms are volatile, social media changes fast. So just be wary that one of the main keys from this book is going to be changing your thinking, not totally changing like things you're doing specifically, because it's always changing, so you're always going to have to update that. But your thinking with some of these insights can stay the same, and then out of that, your actions change. So final caveat is that a lot of the social media platforms change frequently, so just be wary of what you take on specific advice on platforms, as that will change. All right, let's get into the 5 insights from the book. Insight number 1 is that attention is marketing's main currency. The book's title states day trading attention. If you think about day traders, people who sell stocks, they're constantly trying to find an underpriced stock that the attention could go up on it, but they're going to buy into it. So his whole argument is that marketers need to take this insight that, hey, we're day traders of attention. We need to be constantly looking, trading, attention, trying to find that next place while also further deepening the places that our audience's attention already is at. Sadly, most marketers don't have this intense focus on attention, and they rather treat the currency kind of as something that isn't as important. Hey, if we just have this or that, we don't need to focus as much on their attention. So what does this result in? A lot of low quality content without caring if it's truly earning people's attention, assuming the formats of yesterday will still work today, that they'll still gain people's attention. Our attention is fastly changing onto new things. So those old formats, even yesterday's format, just doesn't hold up today. And then finally, just moving too slow to capitalize. They're just starting a TikTok account today. I'm guilty of that, rather than starting in 2019 when the attention was much cheaper than it is today. So what does treating attention like currency even look like? It's really looking like finding and investing in those underpriced attention opportunities that I mentioned, whether that's a new platform, emerging formats, or just cultural moments that if you tapped into, you know the attention is there, and that could help you move forward with your marketing by treating attention as a currency rather than just something that we can always get or that's unlimited and Mr. Beast videos aren't taking people's attention away from you, which they are. If you didn't catch my conversation with Deandra Escobar, our first one, she touches on total addressable attention, which we're all fighting for the attention of our audience, which is a key piece. So if you want to listen to that episode, I'm not going to go through the catalog to find what number that was. Just search Deandra Escobar on marketing and you'll find that conversation, because I think it's a really good point that we're fighting with so many people for our audience's attention. Another way that this actualizes is just moving very fast, testing often, experimenting. Hey, new platform, blue sky, we're going to experiment on it. We're going to do a 6-month trial on it, and then being okay to reallocate your spend. Too many times in previous organizations working with different companies, I'd find they'd be spending a lot on display ads. And I'm not even going to argue their effectiveness, because I think if you're listening to the show, you understand display ads suck. But it's just insane how slow people are to reallocate their spend. Money, they're literally just setting on fire versus trying to go to Facebook, going to these places that attention's currently at, and reallocating your spend there, which Gary shares later on in this insight number 3 how to actually do that. So stay tuned. And then this actualizes kind of at the top point of valuing engagement quality over vanity metrics like raw impressions or followers, just because you're realizing that the attention is the only thing that matters. And if our content isn't holding, gaining more of it, it doesn't matter how many views this got, how much if the engagement isn't there. So I really think that's important. Engagement rate, some of these vanity metrics are still useful, but followers, impressions, as you'll see in the next insight, just don't matter as much. So the takeaways from this insight, attention is marketing's main currency, is treat attention with urgency. It's scarce. Don't treat it like it'll be here forever, or don't disrespect your audience's attention. If they're going to give it to you, make sure it's worthwhile, whatever you're delivering on content, messaging, or value. Find where attention is that's underpriced and move quick. So sometimes that's hard because you're going to be making guesses, Clubhouse, and some of those guesses will turn out to be wrong. But if you don't make the right guess, if you don't buy a lot of properties, you'll never land on the beachfront property that then booms in value. So find out where attention is going, where it's underpriced, and start investing through experiments. And then finally, remember that depth beats width. Too many times we think we want tons of impressions, tons of followers, but 1 minute of your ideal customer giving you their all attention is worth more than 1,000 people kind of going past your video and not actually engaging. So shifting your mind away from followers, impressions to more of this engagement. Are we touching an interest of our audience? Which leads into insight number 2, which is how social media has shifted from follower-led to interest-led. This is, I think, one of the largest insights, and one of the things that I felt as a marketer the most in the marketplace is that social media platforms are no longer rewarding you for your followers. It used to be that followers were the gateway to visibility. If you wanted platforms to reward you, get your content in front of people, you need to have tons of followers, because then those followers would see your content. Facebook quickly dismantled that by essentially saying, we're only going to show this to 3% of your audience unless you give us more money. And then another significant shift that Gary talks about is the TikTokification of social media. So rather than content being surfaced based off who you're following, it's based on your interest. You give the platform interest signals, and then it will give you content that fills that. So rather than, okay, I'm following 20 people and I see all of their posts in my feed, the algorithm or the AI has gotten so good that it will know, hey, this person only has like 2 followers, but they created something that I know will be interesting to Jordan. We're going to give it to Jordan. So you could have 5 followers, but you could reach 5 million people. That never was possible on social media in the past, but that's possible today. So I find that so interesting and such a foundational shift to how we approach social media, because the follower numbers don't really matter anymore. Sure, they matter to your ego, but they don't actually matter to your content marketing success, or just in general, your marketing's ability to drive outcomes, which I think that's really great for a lot of people who haven't spent tons of time building an audience, but it does require a little bit of energy to start to then create content in a different way, which is, how do we adapt to this interest-led? How do we adapt to interest-led platforms rather than follower-led platforms? First thing, build content, create content around discoverability. So think about, what does your audience love? What do they share? What are they seeking out? Which is kind of common, which probably isn't different that much, but it really makes you start thinking outside the box rather than just, we have this many followers and they're going to see our stuff. You have to then actually start to get creative and create things that they're trying to find, that a high chance of being discovered. Next, which I've talked about a bit, focus less on your followers and more on creating content that naturally finds the people you want to find. So that means you have to understand their interests. You have to understand their fears. What do they laugh at? Which takes a little bit more time than just saying, hey, since we have all these followers, we can create whatever we want. Let's talk about our products. You actually have to create things that are interesting. So I hope the days are forever gone of saying, a bank per se, saying, hey, our CD rates are at this percent. It doesn't matter, because no one's going to see that, because nobody's interest is, what are the CD rates at? Or, hey, I want to get an auto loan. Nobody cares. So I think we're going to move from service and product-based post to things that people actually find interesting, skits, things that people can laugh at or learn from. So again, finally, the key to adapting this is paying attention to what content is getting shared and saved by your audience, not just those following you, and then recreating similar content in your brand, in your voice that matches that or touches on a similar interest. So then the algorithms, which are super smart, can pull your piece of content to tons of people that aren't following you, which then could follow you. So key takeaways: followers don't equal reach anymore. Interest does. If you create interesting content, people will find it. The AI, the algorithm will get it to them. And then stop building for followers, as we said, and build for engagement and discovery. Insight number 3, which I mentioned earlier, is the new way to do organic and paid. So the simplest way to think about this is your organic is a lab. It's kind of a research lab for your paid. So if things do well in your organic place, because now it doesn't matter how many followers you have, you could create a piece of content that is interesting, that gets tons of engagement. Then from that, you can say, we need to create an ad, maybe not similar, exactly like that, but very close to it, because we know we've already validated that this does well through organic. The challenge or the mistake is to create paid and organic as two separate islands. This results in you posting random content, hoping it could go viral organically without any sort of follow-up plan or ability to then turn that into a paid ad, spending heavily on paid ads without knowing what messaging or what type of content actually works, aside from what you've done only in the paid space, which I think is a bad place to experiment because you're spending money, and then treating paid media as a crutch for weak creative instead of a force multiplier. Sometimes we'll put money behind the shittiest creative, the crappiest ad, while we could just use organic to have a force multiplier to say, this is doing well, these types of posts are doing well, let's post more of them. And then guess what? Putting money behind a successful piece of content will only help it be more successful. Crazy, I know. It's insane. It's almost like a startup, or you're trying to introduce a product to market. Get the feedback quickly before you put tons of money into feature development and all that. I find it has such similar parallels where you can use audience feedback, organic, to fuel your paid. So what does a modern organic and paid strategy look like? You create high quality organic content based on your audience's interests and other insights you have on your audience. Then you fuel that through engagement. So you start to comment back, hopefully, and you see what's getting shared, what are people reacting to before you put money into any of it. And then you amplify only the best performing pieces through paid media to just scale their impact they're already creating. This totally shifts most people's approach, where it's like, we can do paid media without it doing any organic. And my argument used to be, that's stupid, because I'll go to your page after I see your ad, and if you have nothing organically there, I probably won't engage, I probably won't buy from you. While that argument still holds up, it's just bad thinking to say we don't need to do organic, we just can do paid or social media. And I think that fails almost every single time. I've yet to find an example of a company who's doing only paid media. Maybe they do a few organic posts, but they just suck. They're investing no actual effort, money into their organic, and then those paid media, that paid ads, are doing well. It just rarely happens. And most times, again, they're just lighting their money on fire. So it's this kind of a 3-step process. You get very intentional about the organic content you're putting out. You monitor that and you talk with people about that. And then you start to put money behind the best performing piece of content that your audience has told you, not you in some boardroom thinking this will be what our audience likes, so let's put a lot of money behind it. I love it. I think this was one of my biggest takeaways from the book, is just this thinking of using organic to fuel your paid. I love it. I see those two strategies working so hand in hand. What are the takeaways for this third insight? Organic, as I said, is your research lab. Paid is your megaphone. Use organic to learn, and then use your paid dollars to amplify the things you learned. Don't scale content that you haven't proven to work first. Organic is one way. There's other ways you could do this, focus groups, but make sure whatever you're putting money behind, you've actually proven to some extent the messaging, the creative, something in there works. And we might be testing another component, but like good experiments, not everything can be changed. You need some controlled aspect of it that you know will succeed. So that's why using organic can validate whether messaging, creative, all sorts of things that then you can use in your paid strategy. The main takeaway is let your audience dictate what to amplify. Don't tell your audience what you need to put money, paid dollars behind. Let them tell you this is what we'll react to. And identical people like us that don't know about you will probably react to that too. So then you put that out in the world through paid dollars, reaching those people that you know you want to reach, and it will do far better than if you never validated it through organic. All right, enough of that. The fourth insight, the most important question you need to ask when creating social content for social is, why am I making this content? Gary brought this question up through the book and kind of uses it repeatedly because it's so important for marketers to go back to what's the purpose, because many times we can create content with no clear purpose. We can just post to meet an internal calendar or stay active. This is a reason why I hate content calendars in their current form, because they just promote posting and not actually touching into the interests of your audience. Again, as I said, making product center posts without thinking about what's useful to the audience. Why am I making this piece about the cost of this car or whatever, when nobody wants to know how much your cars cost? They want to laugh at how terrible car salesmen are. So you create some funny content around that rather than product centered. But again, if you have no clear purpose, you could create a lot of those if you're not asking, why am I making this? And then creating content out of habit instead of intention, leading to essentially invisible and ineffective content, which most businesses are struggling with today. So what does creating purposeful content look like? What does answering, why am I making this content every single time? Every piece of content has a specific reason. It should either educate, entertain, inspire, or build permission to sell something. You start to get super specific on, this piece can't do all of it. I had a recent conversation a few episodes ago with Vivek Shankar, and he talked about not all pieces of content need to be like super good and super flashy. If you can understand what's the job of this piece of content, why am I making this piece of content, and then deliver on that job, it will be a success, even if it's not some super shiny thing or whatever you think all content needs to be. So this then makes you get very intentional of every time you create, why are we making this content? You can also then start to match pieces of content to the journey, to that customer's journey, whether it's awareness, consideration, conversion. You can go through all of them: top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. And then it's just a simple gut check, which I think is important for everybody, but just simple gut check every time you post to say, if I were my audience, would I care? Which then is kind of inherent in that question of, why am I making this content? And if I can't answer if I would care, then I probably shouldn't do it. So a few takeaways from this insight: if you can't explain why you're posting it, don't post it. Simple as that. Purposeful content attracts, random content gets ignored. While nobody will know maybe your intention, because you shouldn't put your intention on that piece of content, I think we will feel it. I think with people, relational, when someone's intentional, you just feel that, versus like, okay, that was a really nice act, but I do feel like you kind of just randomly were by the flower store and then you just bought me flowers, rather than going across town, being intentional about it. They don't need to tell you, hey honey, I drove across town to get you these flowers. You feel it, that they were far more intentional than just some random act of kindness, which again, if you're going to do nothing, do some random acts of kindness. So if you're not doing any content, I guess random content is a good start, but just get more intentional and purposeful with your content, putting things on it for each piece. This is middle of the funnel, and this is going to be an educational piece. This is top of the funnel and entertainment. It just makes your pieces far more, direct. But then you can also start to look back and say, none of the posts that were around middle of the funnel and entertainment worked. Maybe we need to do entertainment at top of the funnel. So it's also a great way to then look back to ensure, hey, we're making improvement on our content, rather than just like, I don't know what's working, because we aren't intentional at all. And then, which I think this is a key takeaway, and as I mentioned, why I hate content calendars, make content decisions that serve your audience first, not your content calendar. I don't think I need to say more on that takeaway, as I think that's the whole point of this, is you stop creating content just randomly and you start to create content that is purposeful. And finally, insight number 5, thank you for sticking with me if you're still here. Number 5, comments, conversations, and listening are your best content strategies. Too many brands still think marketing is about talking and not listening, thinking that social is a megaphone, as we talked about earlier, rather than a research lab where you can learn from it. So sometimes this results as people treat comments as a vanity signal instead of a strategic insight tool. So maybe we're hype about the comments, but we're not actually reading them or going actually deep to take them in. We're just like, look at how many comments we got. It's more of a boost to our ego than actually trying to learn from them, which then results in us sometimes ignoring rich audience feedback because it's inconvenient or uncomfortable, and that comments from someone who probably is not an ideal customer. And then this also results in missing those biggest opportunities by just assuming sometimes what they hear isn't what actual people want, rather than being almost a slave to those comments, being very open to changing based off what you get, which is like what somebody who's a listener does, is they take in so much, and they don't always take it right to heart, but they take in so much that they're able to move forward in a better place, a better position stance than if they took nothing in. So what does turning listening into a strategy actually look like? first actively monitoring comments, DMs, and conversations that are happening outside of your content or even your industry, just to understand what your audience is thinking or where their attention is split. Getting other questions. Sometimes you learn from comments, just more questions to ask to learn more, or you could start to see themes or common things that your audiences are thinking, liking, or talking about. A really sweet way to actualize this is to turn those comments, that feedback, into future content, whether it's an actual piece of content, whether it's a topic you go and offer, a campaign, but actually treating people's comments and then putting that into your content strategy, I find is so useful and so effective because, hey, they're actually listening, which, as I mentioned at the start, is rare. So people will then be drawn to you because, wow, they actually create content based off comments and things that my time is worthwhile to engage with their content, which is a really key insight with so many different pieces of content out there, having our attention so dispersed to then say, wow, I want to give my attention to them because they actually do stuff with my comments or my feedback, which then results in your content calendar starting to look or be reflected of real conversations and not brainstorming in isolation, which I find to be so critical to creating an effective content calendar, is ensure that it actually touches on things that people in your audience actually want to talk about, hear about, or think about, rather than just what you need to get them, what you need to say to them, or how you want to present your products and your offerings. So a few final takeaways is stop guessing what your audience wants and just ask them. They're already telling you in different ways. Ask them and go find that out through their content, through their comments, or through different engagements on content that they have. Comments are gold mines. As I mentioned, you need to pay attention to them and actually do something from them. And just this fact that listening is the fastest way to create content that feels made for me than just trying to guess or shoot in a barrel. As I talked about, if I ask a question and then that content creator or that business then addresses that in a bigger piece of content, I'm sold for life. They actually care. They're treating my attention not as something that's fleeting, but something that's so pristine, something that's so scarce that they're going to keep creating more content based off me giving their attention. And I think that's something we can all emulate in our own marketing. But now, to make this far more practical, I want to jump to the 3 questions to contemplate to ensure that you leave this episode with real practical improvements versus just some theoretical wisdom, which is also helpful. Question number 1, where is my audience attention right now and where is it heading next? Attention is shifting faster than ever and most brands are moving too slow. So while you could be relying overtly on legacy platforms, Facebook, websites, your audience has likely shifted to new places: TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts. You need to be creating content for where your audience is now, not where they used to be. Ignoring early signs of platform fatigue or changing in your audience consumes content will lead to less effective content because you're slower to be where they are and to create content that they want to see. So again, as we talked about so much through this episode, continually watch where your audience is, where they're spending their time, talk to them, ask them, and you might even find a new app, a new place, Reddit, that you didn't even think about putting content out on. Experiment early and often, test new content formats, emerging platforms, new features within platforms, and just push the envelope on finding new attention and capturing new places of attention. And finally, ask your audience directly, whether through polls, DMs, email surveys, face-to-face, ask where they are, where they're paying the most attention to, and then act on that. Am I creating content where my audience attention is going or just where it used to be? A powerful question that hopefully will get you to pivot a little bit in where you're creating content. Question number 2, how often am I listening to my audience versus talking at them? Listening will show you what your audience really cares about. In talking, just ends up in you guessing because you never hear what they actually have to say. So how do you listen better? Mind the comments, DMs, forums, reviews, even the things that aren't great about your business or your service. Those are the ones that actually probably have the most gold for improvements. Host live sessions or Q&As to actually get feedback, create the space for that, which I don't see a lot of people doing because a lot of brands probably don't want to get that feedback. But I think it's a gold mine for improving. And then build listening into your workflow. Set aside some time every single week to review what your audience is actually saying. Have people, whether sales or different people in the field, bring back all of that and have a single source of truth that you can keep adding that to and then say, wow, we're starting to see some trends, some shifts from our audience. You could even use AI to say, hey, take in all this information and provide some shifts or some things that they're changing. Because again, you won't know if you're only talking at them where they're going or what they're thinking But by listening, you get that inner scope, you get that insight into their life that then allows you to be ahead of the curve. How often am I building content from what I hear my audience saying rather than just broadcasting what I want to say? For many brands, it'll be far more on the broadcasting side than listening and then creating content that your audience wants. But that is where the opportunity is. Question number 3, final question. I'm even getting tired talking here, so I hope you're still with me. Question number 3 is, where am I trying to scale something that hasn't proven it works yet? Am I running ads on things that I have not done any sort of validation to actually ensure that my audience wants to see those ads? One really interesting thing that I will pull here to make it far more practical is LinkedIn ads have transitioned to this very deep, at least what I've seen, is they're almost these deep learning posts. You'll see an ad, and rather than some ads that are only maybe 3 sentences, these ads will literally be probably 1,500 to 3,000 word posts, and they're doing really well. So again, if they didn't validate that through organic, which you see a lot of those organic posts, pretty long posts on LinkedIn, they validated that and then said, hey, people want to see people, long posts, let's merge those together. And then all of a sudden, I've been getting so many of these ads on LinkedIn where it's combining almost like interview-based posts, but it's an ad. So it's not like, hey, click here to learn more. The whole ad is the content, the value, which I find to be interesting and probably something that has proved valuable on organic social, which then now is being amplified through paid. So here's how you can validate before scaling your content through paid ads. Start small and test. Let organic tell you what's going on, but try to start small. Just do a few different formats and monitor those over a month to 2 months to then begin investing some money into the successful pieces of content. Use that paid media to amplify those winners. Only scale what's already working, which is already earning you attention in the organic feeds, but then will likely more or less earn you attention in the paid feeds. And then just continually tighten that feedback loop. Sorry if there's any Lukes listening to this. Most people have a very long feedback loop. They're getting feedback whether months or even years later. Try to ensure that you have a system that allows you to post stuff on organic, talk with customers, have a place in which you're dropping all these feedback insights into, so you have a single source of truth that you can go to say, hey, I think our audience is moving here. Here's the things that tell me that from what we've listened to them say. Am I scaling content that has already been proven to work? Or am I just pushing ideas I wish would work? Such a great question. I think it could be foundational to changing and improving your marketing. And that's a wrap on the second book review we've done for the special edition of On Marketing. I'm planning to do these every other month, every few months, mixing them into the regular flow of episodes. That said, though, I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Do you enjoy the book review format? Are there other books that you want me to review in the future? Because honestly, I don't want to tease a little bit, but the next book is going to be This is Strategy by Seth Godin. I don't know how. I've been reading a lot of Seth Godin lately, but if there's a book you want me to read, an author you want me to share on here, let me know. And if there's just anything I could do to make these better, more helpful, or more enjoyable, please send me a quick email, Jordan, Jordano, @hey.com. So again, that's Jordano, Jordano, @hey.com, and share any ways that I could improve it, any books you want me to review, or just anything that could improve this. Your feedback is so important to making this show worthwhile to do. As I've been preaching through the last 20, 30 minutes, I am here to listen to what you want so we can keep creating content that brings you value, that helps you make progress on your marketing journey. Remember, day trading attention isn't perfect, and no book is, but the core truth of that book is so valid and useful today that the real marketing advantage isn't just earning attention, it's day trading it before it moves on and getting it when it's underpriced, which is a skill and something that takes a long time to learn and get good at. So why not start today improving how you can day trade attention? Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you back for the next book review and for the next episode of On Marketing. What one idea or topic of conversation stood out to you today? Write it down, share it with a friend, post on social. The main thing is take action. That's how we go from theory to mastery. We need to practice. We need to put it into practice. Thank you for listening and being here, and I hope you tune in next week.